All right, everybody, you will be happy that I have this beautiful woman on the show here with me today. We met at, this is Christine Cerminiello. Cerminiello? Did I
Good
say
job.
it correctly?
Terminello. Yep, that's it.
Very good. It's Doctor, actually. She is a pediatrician. We met at the wedding of the century, Jackie DiPiazza, Jackie Farrell now, her wedding. That was a fun time, wasn't it? That was a good wedding.
It was awesome. One of
Yeah.
the best I've been to. That the cocktail hour was
Yeah.
like,
Isn't that true? So I've said this before. We sat down for the cocktail. I don't know how you were because I thought that was all the food. There was so much food at the cocktail hour. I thought,
uh-huh.
and it would have been great. But then another full meal comes out when we sit down. So we had kind of the ranger table, I guess we'll call it. Stefan Matteau, Adam Graves, Nick Fatillo, myself, and the Cerminiello family, and actually the Mike Fasula and his lovely wife Quinn too, right? Quinn with one N.
Yes, exactly.
So it was a fun day. So we really hit it off. I talked a lot about my mental health shows we have, the motivational part of it, and I think what really intrigued me about you, well, a few things, but it's just I thought you. Being a pediatrician, you could just deal with the medicine part of it, I guess. But I think you were really intrigued by the whole mental health and how to deal with kids in that regard. It seems like that's a big part of your practice, correct?
Absolutely.
Good. Now, have you taken any training in mental health, or is it just something you've learned along the way?
I think it's definitely something you learn along the way. It's funny because we just had 2 new hires in the office. And so, of course, we learn about like what the ear is supposed to look like and how the lungs are supposed to sound and stuff like that. But a lot of what I do is talking about childhood development, upbringing, tantrums, managing emotions. And, we see anywhere from newborns to 26-year-olds. So you can imagine how different people can be from managing the mental health more of the mom of a postpartum woman up to teenage girls with eating disorders and, the whole gamut.
So eating disorders, that's an interesting topic there for me, because I think one of the biggest things that we have a problem in this country is our diets, right? Eating bad foods, not exercising. So do you go right ahead and you start, like, is it a delicate thing if you see a child that's overweight and you start that conversation, or do you have to wait for the parents to start the conversation about the weight?
Yes, I was just talking about this with one of my friends who was in town because we both have little kids. We're talking about how we try to keep them having these balanced meals and stuff like that, and how some other people, when growing up, could eat anything. But usually, as soon as I walk in the room when it's a baby, I see a lot of people in one day. So I try to keep my schedule and my regimen. I walk in, I go over the growth curve. We talk about the vaccines that are coming up. We go over any issues they have, like eczema, allergies, whatever, development, exam, and that's it. But when I start with a teenager, it's a lot more delicate, or with a younger child that is having weight issues. Then I try to start with, how was your summer? How's everything going? What are your activities like? Maybe do it backwards then, start with their issues. How are your seasonal allergies this year? Have you, had to take Zyrtec a lot and stuff like that? And then talk about everything else. And then kind of at the end say, well, let's go over your growth curve. And the growth curve is an interesting thing, right? Because it is the only objective measurement that we have about growth, weight, and there's the BMI, but all of it is still also subjective. And I always say, I go over the numbers and I talk about, so underweight in a kid would be less than the 5th percentile when we're looking at their weight to height ratio, or the BMI. Overweight would be 85 to 95%, and obese is 95 and above. So sometimes parents are very surprised when I say your kid is technically in the overweight category. And they're like, what are you talking about? Look at them. They don't look overweight. Right. But then I try to then take a step back and say, look, I care more about your lifestyle and your schedule and what you're eating and how you're moving your body than I do about these numbers. So let's talk about the MyPlate. Or I don't know if you've seen the MyPlate. It's like,
no, I have not.
So it's like a government website, but it's basically the new food pyramid. So like we used to think about like grains being at the bottom and fats at the top and things that you don't want to eat as much of. But the MyPlate is now, it's basically like half of your plate should be fruits and vegetables, a quarter grains, a quarter protein. It's kind of looking at the plate. So when you look at your plate at mealtime, and I often say a lot of kids, when they look at their plate, mac and cheese is not a full meal, right? It can be part of a meal, but it can't be the whole meal. So talking about how the lifestyle, and trying to be sensitive about it.
And so if you see, this is a delicate subject too, but if you see parents maybe that are not in shape or overweight.
Yeah.
So obviously, then there's a lot of different factors, right? That obviously they're not getting enough exercise, their diet isn't very good. So it's almost like you've got to, well, not almost, you've got to educate them as well as
Absolutely.
educating. Very cool.
Yeah, it's interesting because so now I work in private practice in Hoboken, and my patient population is very well educated, very everybody wants to be the best parent kind of thing.
Right, right.
Whereas in my training, I did my training at Mount Sinai in New York City, where a lot of the kids were lower income families and didn't have a lot of access to like Whole Foods and higher, the more expensive good for you foods. So
Right.
I had done like a program at one of the schools, and the kids like didn't know which fruit was a
Right.
vegetable,
Right.
which food was a fruit or a vegetable or
Right.
stuff like that. Whereas those, even the more educated parents will say something like, oh, well, they just love this. I don't know how to keep them from eating
Yeah.
this. And I'm
Right.
like, well, if you don't have it in the house, then
Yep.
they can't eat it.
Yeah.
So,
Isn't that
training.
true? Like, there's no, and I think we all do this. I've got my two sons I love to death. They've turned out to be great young men, but there's no manual for raising kids. And part of that is like preparing, okay, if I give them bad food now, they're going to be used to having bad food all the time, as opposed to saying, no, I'm not going to give them that bad food. I'm going to have healthy food in the house. That's very true. I know for me, being an athlete, you really didn't have to pay attention to what you're eating either. We should have
Right.
more, but we're always burning off the calories. So, drink beer and fried foods and all that. But we're not aware. Now I'm more aware of it. Isn't just the weight, right? It's like, what's it doing to your arteries inside? Like when you eat those hot
Absolutely.
dogs, right? Yeah. Like hot dogs, that's one of my major beefs. It's like, why don't we just give them a cigarette for God's sakes?
Right.
Don't you think they're terrible for you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's like there's National Hot Dog Day. We're celebrating that we're putting poison into our body. It's just, it drives me nuts.
Those
Yeah.
those competitions that they have on the 4th
Yeah.
of July.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I'm nauseous watching them.
I know, right? Like the Joey Chestwood or whatever his name is. That
Yeah.
God, like to open up his body and like see what the veins are just packed. Although
Seriously.
I know I get to take care of it, but I guess it's like anything else, right? If you have a hot dog like once every month or something like that, it's not a big deal.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And a big part of, I feel like, the education that I do too is having a healthy relationship with food. It
Yeah.
sounds counterintuitive,
Yeah.
but eat when you're hungry, stop when you're full. It's okay to go to a birthday party and have pizza and cake. It's okay to celebrate, this or that. You just don't want to do it every night
Right.
or after every meal or that kind
Yeah.
of thing.
So I use an app called MyFitPal by Under Armour.
Oh, uh-huh.
So a chart, you put in all your foods and it gives you a chart, that pie chart of the fat, the proteins, and the carbs. So it's like you said, if I had a really good diet throughout the day and I want to have something that maybe isn't as good, then if it all balances out, then it's not as big a deal. But I've gotten bad, I said bad in a good way. I make my own food. I think we talked about this. I make my own ketchup and hummus and all that now.
Good for you.
Yeah, I've just, again, like you touched on it before, it's that education, right? So now what you learn about, like, so ketchup, for instance, has that high fructose corn syrup in it, which is terrible for you. And I had ketchup all my life, really didn't realize it. And again, it's easier for me because I work from home too, so I can make my own ketchup by sauteing up the onions and putting the tomatoes and the peppers and everything in the air fryer to get that sweetness, and then just put it all together. So it's I learned a lot. I've told this story many times. When I first got divorced, my boys were 4 and 6 years old. I couldn't cook at all. So one day we'd have hamburger helper, and the next would be tuna noodles.
Right.
Oh God, that was actually a really good thing. My son's like, we'd sit and we watch the Emerald and all these cooking shows.
Yeah.
And,
Learning
they're
together.
Yeah. And do you think that's a big part of it too? The ability, and again, it is tougher. I mean, you're busy, you're a doctor, your husband's busy with his career, to be able to have the time to cook those good meals too. That's part of the issue, right?
Absolutely. One, cooking. I feel like eating out, you never know how much butter or things they put in just to make it, quote, taste good. And also eating natural foods, which is the hardest thing with my 4-year-old right now, because all he wants is something from the pantry, right? Like a bar or something that comes out of a box, which the best way to eat is to eat the actual food, to eat the fruits and the vegetables or the natural things that you don't have to open a bag to eat. But yes, cooking is great. And I'm
so how do you do a lot of prepping then? Do you do meal prepping?
Well, so I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old boy, both of whom are very active, always on the move, very set on getting my attention because I'm gone a lot of the day. So when I come home, it's 6:00. We got to eat dinner, do bedtime, get to bed, and get ready to do it all again. So I don't have a lot of time for meal prep. What I do is I bring a box of lettuce. I try to change it up. 1 week I'll do a box of spinach. Then last week I did arugula, and then I sit at the table. I have more time and quiet at the lunch hour at my office to just cut up all my vegetables and fruits.
Oh,
And it's usually just like a fruit, a veggie, a cheese, a nut, and a
right.
salad. And that's my lunch. And then dinner time, we do something
Right.
easier.
Sure.
And breakfast, I always make this. I do meal prep for breakfast. I make like a parfait. I cut up a bunch of melon with
Oh,
a yogurt and then chia seeds and almond butter. And then I put some granola on top, and I just make like a big Tupperware of it. And I have some of that each
right.
morning sitting at my desk in between patients.
And then how about the kids then? Are you able to get them on some pretty healthy foods?
So I have two boys, and they could
Yeah.
not be more different with their
Oh, oh,
appetites.
oh, okay.
So Mason has always been a control freak. Everything is like a battle with him. He's very strong-willed. I always say he's going to be somebody's boss one day, and he's going to
Yeah.
be a great boss. It's just really hard to be his mom. So he's the kind of kid who like doesn't like it before he even put it in his mouth. Like he refuses to put it into his mouth. So I'm trying to do gentle, like exposure to everything. Sometimes you could go either way, right? You could say, well, you can't do this, you can't do that until you take 5 bites. We do that sometimes, but also sometimes we say, here's your everything, eat it or don't eat it. And the more you kind of, when you take a step back and they don't feel like you're pushing them,
Oh,
then
okay.
I might look over and he hates them. That's good, because then it's not like my head
Right.
against his head. He feels
Sure.
like, oh, it's up to me. Whereas my little guy, if you walk in the room with food, he's like, what's that?
Oh,
What's that? I want some, he'll eat anything, he'll try anything. And maybe he'll spit it out if he doesn't like it. And that's fine, because at least he tried it. So
sure.
I have both ends of the spectrum at home. It's very
I see.
satisfying to have a kid who likes to eat, and it's very frustrating to have one who doesn't. But
Yeah.
I can
Okay.
identify with my patients either way at that point. So it's good.
I think we were talking about this at the wedding, the subconscious mind.
Mhm.
It was really fascinating for me. I had a woman on who was a hypnotist, and she taught me about subconscious mind and how it's formed anywhere from the last trimester in the womb up to people think 8, 9, 10 years old. It's got to be a touchy spot for you too. Like if you ever see a child that you think you're kind of worried about, they're going through some kind of a trauma that may affect it's tough for you to step in, right? I mean, because that's the parents. You don't want to insult. Maybe you're not reading the situation properly. Maybe it's just, do you just say to yourself, listen, I've got to say something.
Oh, yeah. So for kids that are 13 years and up, most of the time 13 years and up, we have a mental health survey that they fill out as part of the visit. And it asks things about like, do I feel like nervous and agitated all the time? Do I have trouble falling asleep? Do I have trouble staying asleep? Am I getting like enjoyment out of the things I usually get enjoyment out of? Have I ever thought about hurting myself and things like that?
Okay.
So that survey obviously helps, especially when it's a busy visit and we might not have time to get into the nitty gritty, but it's a great screening tool. So if I take their form when I walk in the room and I realize like they have a high number that they've said yes to a lot of these things, then I know I need to spend more time on this area with this child. But for teenagers, we usually always have a time where the parents are supposed to step out and we just talk with the teenager.
Oh,
It's called the HEADS assessment. You learn that in medical school, going through their home, their activities, things like that. So you kind of start out slow, like we talked about before. What kinds of activities do you like? What is your home life like? Who lives with you? Do you feel safe in your home? And then you can get like, do you have a support system? If you're having a hard time or if you're going through something, do you have somebody you can turn to? And especially during COVID, a lot of kids had a lot of mental health issues because their whole identity is going to school and they were sitting at home all day, every day, looking at these computer screens and trying to do homeschool and stuff. And I would open it up like, everybody's sad sometimes, everybody's happy sometimes, but do you feel like you're more sad or happy or anxious than your friend or your neighbor or something like that? But I've definitely had kids who have attempted suicide, who are cutting, who, have issues like that. And we do talk about confidentiality, how what we talk about in the room is confidential, unless I think you're at risk of hurting yourself or hurting somebody else. So if they're hurting themselves or, then I do have the right to talk to their parents about it. And I'll say, I try to talk to them sometimes outside the room, but sometimes if I'm really trying to gain the child's trust, then I'll talk to them about it inside the room, and I'll ask them first, can I talk to your mom about this? I'm really worried about you. I'll say the same thing to the parent, I'm really worried about your son or your daughter. They expressed like these kinds of concerns, but more so trying to hook them up with the system, which is really hard because the system is lacking, right? Getting them in with a mental health provider and getting them into therapy. But by the time you decide you need therapy, it could be weeks or months before you can get in.
Oh, is that right? So that 988 hotline that they've now have, it's the suicide and mental health hotline. That's not very efficient, or it is?
That is, but that's like a rescue, right?
Okay.
That kid needs to be talking to somebody weekly, and have somebody. So those people are good in like as a rescue, but it's still harder to get them hooked into the system and get a regular care provider.
So it's kind of getting ahead of the problem, right? I mean, you realize, okay, this child, it's almost like you look at every child now. I say, man, it's a tough life out there, right? All the social media, they see all the pictures, and I just find like even with adults, and maybe I'm getting to be the grossy old man, I don't know, but it's like people are getting less patient. They're saying, screw it, I'm just going to go do what I want to do. Everybody's going to do that, so I'm going to take care of myself. The less of us. And again, there's great people out there. I don't want to paint the picture that everybody's walking around angry, but it just seems like people you talk to, it's like, man, it's nutty out there, like driving on the road. So poor kids, maybe their parents are just stressed out too. It's hard to really, like, where do they go? Or do they even know that there's something wrong with them at sometimes?
Yeah. I feel so bad for kids sometimes. And I've had a parent say to me, like, what can be so hard for them? Like, all they do is go to school. And even thinking back to girls who are teenagers or preteens are ugly. They can be nasty. They can do things on purpose to make you feel left out. And, being in school, having your body go through changes of puberty and feeling like you're constantly comparing yourself to others. And especially as you touched on, like Instagram and social media and stuff like that. It's a means where even adults are feeling insecure from comparing themselves to others, but let alone kids who are in a radical change period of their life and are constantly comparing themselves to others.
Isn't it true? Like if you go look at the pictures on Instagram, for instance, you would think you're the ugliest person in the world because these other people are all, touched up and however they do it, the makeup and all this stuff. It's like,
absolutely.
Yeah. But if you don't know any better, if you're a young child, you're going to look in the mirror and go, I don't look like those people at all. It's
right.
It's hard.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
So touchy subject I'm putting you through here today. When I was in the agent business years ago, I had a young player, starting when he was 14 years old. He had been sexually abused by his junior coach and didn't come forward until he was a professional hockey player. And I think he was actually like 25 or something like that when he finally came forward. One of the things that I've noticed it's hard for people to understand in an abuse case like that, where it takes years, in some cases decades, for the victim to come forward and acknowledge what's happened to them. And people go, well, why did they wait so long? Right. So unless you know that person, their support system, which you touched on before, what the situation was, how strong are they? You can't judge. Right. I mean, it's
absolutely.
Yeah. Do you deal with that?
Yes, definitely. To some capacity. There's like a hotline that you can call if you think that your child has, been sexually or physically or mentally abused. One of the sometimes it's like there's a marking that's concerning and they're in daycare and we want to look into that. There's other things like there's a fracture called a toddler fracture, which is notoriously a fracture that a toddler can get with not a lot of trauma. So one of the biggest ways you get it is like if you're holding your kid on your lap going down the slide, their leg gets stuck behind you, they can break their leg. Or a 9 to 12-month-old who's learning how to pull to stand on the side of the couch and they pull their body up, but their leg was stuck under the couch and that can cause a fracture. A twisting movement can cause a fracture. But a lot of times, like in the emergency department, the parents don't understand my child is limping. There's no known trauma. We don't know nothing happened. I don't know why they're limping. You get an x-ray and there's a fracture. Sometimes they have to call like Child Protective Services to look in on the family and make sure that there wasn't any abusive activity. So the other thing that's probably, I'm going to be honest with you, my least favorite part of my job is dealing with families where parents are not together and they are not on the same page with their child's health. and I'm like painted as the middle person, right? So I'm concerned about my child's safety in the home when they're with ex-parent or vice versa.
Right.
And that is a really difficult situation for us. And, obviously my best interest is just for the safety of the child, but I'm not, like, I just want to take care of everybody and keep them healthy. I don't want to be like a referee in those situations. So that can be hard, but yes, we do have to sometimes call Child Protective Services, and we can say, we just say, this is what I saw in the room, or this is what I was told. It's my job to keep the child safe, and I have to make a phone call to make sure that they're safe in the home.
Yeah, like you mentioned the physical, but that mental part too, like the arguing and fighting and saying bad things. The one good thing my ex-wife and I did, we divorced very well. We did a good job of getting divorced. We went to a child psychiatrist and just said, okay, how do we handle this properly? And one of the big things, I know you know this, but one of the big things they said was just don't badmouth each other in front of the children. And to her credit, we both did that. And my boys, actually, I sat down with them recently and talked about the divorce, any effects from it, how you feel, and they're fine. Life was great. That it was, and I'm very happy about that. Right. But you do see a lot of that where there's so much vindictive people out there, and they're trying to use the children to get to the ex-spouse and everything. It's like, oh, man, that's gonna be tough for you as a doctor, right? Like you're this good family person, Midwest girl. You're from Ohio, right?
Yeah, I grew up in Ohio.
Right. So you get good values and morals. You got a great family going on. Then you see these people doing these things. Like, man, that's the hard part. I like you touched on already. Like, how do you do that as a parent? Like, how can you not see the damage you're doing to your child, right?
I know, to put it on them, but it goes the other way, just like you said. I mean, I've had two close people to me and who came from divorced families, and I was asked, how was that or something? They're like, oh, it was so much better once they just got divorced. Like, they weren't meant to be together, and it was just so much better after they got divorced. So it goes either way, as long as you make it a healthy environment for them.
That is true. It's funny. I probably had, because I was in the agent business representing players at the time. So I was the typical guy that was gone all the time working, and I figured my wife would stay at home and take care of the kids. Then when I went to get divorced again, I came from that background, the farming background in Canada, where people just didn't get divorced. So I was like, I think, what am I doing to my kids? It was the right thing for my ex and I, that we need to be away from each other. So it really forced me to kind of cut back on my career a little bit and spend more time with my kids. And I'd really, man, I look back, and that's one of the proudest things I've ever done. Mm-hmm. And I really recommend it to people. I know it's tough. As a father, you've got to make a certain amount of money, you got to pay child support and alimony and all that. But at the same time, man, there's got to be ways to spend more time with your kids.
Right.
So when if you're to train to be a pediatrician, do you have to take psychology classes as well? It seems like you do.
Yes. Yes, definitely. Like psychiatry, psychology was part of the training in terms of the courses that we took. And I did a psychiatric rotation also. So spent time in the inpatient and outpatient psychiatric institutes for children in residency. Yeah.
Well, it seems like you, maybe all pediatricians are like this. You really are on top of the mental part of it as well. It's not just the physical part of it. Is that all pediatricians? Is that generally their job too?
Yes, I would like to think so. It's the whole patient, the whole child. We all have to know how to deal with situations, and even if we're not the one checking in with them weekly, then getting them hooked into providers who can. But also, like we talked about, I've had several teenage girls with eating disorders who I do see on a regular basis, like every month, for a weight check and to check their heart rate and blood pressure and stuff like that. And I'm definitely more closely involved in the management of those cases, which I'm not sure if that's necessarily universal. Sometimes there's specific eating disorder clinics and stuff like that. But most of the time, I think general pediatricians can manage a little bit of everything. It's funny in medicine, when you're picking your career, they say, do you want to know a little bit about everything, or a little bit about nothing, or nothing about everything? So do you want to have one specific topic that you know everything about, but if somebody asks you a question that's not that topic, you have no idea, or a little bit about everything where you can, there's a lot of things you see a lot and you know those pretty well, but you know everything else a little bit too, but at least know where to send them or how to look it up.
Eating disorders. So I've learned through those formative years, up to like 8, 9, 10 years old, sometimes if there's a trauma that happens to the child, some abuse, loss of a family member, addiction occurs because, not all the time, but sometimes, in a large percentage of the times, they say like a alcohol addiction, drug addiction. Is it the same way with an eating disorder?
Yeah, I think so. So I think a lot of the stem from eating disorders come from kids who have changes going on in their lives that they can't control.
Oh, okay.
Um, and being able to control what you eat is the only way they feel like they can control something.
Oh,
So I actually did a research project in medical school at an eating disorder clinic, and we did a study about anorexia and bulimia, um, and self-injuring behaviors like cutting and burning and stuff like that. And we thought that the anorexic children would be those who would be more like want to look perfect, want to be perfect gymnasts who are trying to make their body look a certain way or stuff like that. Whereas the bulimics were more like cutters and had, maybe piercings and tattoos and other things. It wasn't actually exactly what we found, but I think, a lot of it is just trying to have control when they feel out of control because
sure.
maybe they're home or they're moving or something, whatever world they're living in is spinning and they can't control it.
And could that go off into adulthood as well? I guess if it's not controlled, like
Yeah, absolutely. I had a patient coming into the summer who I was getting hooked in with a dietitian and a mental health provider. And she was going to go to college in this fall. And the mom was like, we just need to get this under control because they were also moving down to Florida from New Jersey, like so many changes. She was also a cross country athlete. So all of these are things that could put her at risk for an eating disorder. But the mom's attitude was like, we just need to get this under control before the fall, like get rid of it.
Sure.
And I ended up speaking to the dietitian and the mental health provider as well. So we were all on the same page. And they were like, my concern is that this mom thinks this is going to like get better before she goes to school in the fall. This could be a lifelong battle,
Sure.
People with body image issues and things like that. It doesn't just go away.
How do you feel about meditation and hypnosis for those kinds of things?
Love it.
Oh, nice.
I love meditation. So I did the Peloton meditation lessons. I would try to do, because I go from one spinning world of being at home with these two boys who want every ounce of my attention to going to the office to patient after patient after patient and returning phone calls in between and everything. And the way to work was like my still 30 minutes. So I would try to do a meditation every day in the car on the way to work just to like work on slowing my breathing. Cause you don't realize, you're running out the door in the morning. As soon as you get there, you have a patient waiting for you. It's like, there's just no slow period. And I think it really is helpful I didn't realize how much slowing your breath, slowing your body and sitting still can also then slow your mind and these racing thoughts and your to-do list and what's next and what's next. So I think meditation is great for people of all ages, even for preschoolers. They have like YouTube videos where you can watch a balloon like expand and contract and expand and contract. And like my son did it in his preschool class even. And I've tried to use that when he's in the middle of a meltdown and, trying to get him to calm down. I think it's great.
That's true. And I've learned more and more too. I saw a video where they described your brain is really like a pharmacy and your body is like a pharmacy as well. So if you've got good thoughts going into your brain, it releases all these good molecules of proteins going into your body. And conversely, if your body's healthy and you're exercising, it releases all these proteins that go to your brain. So,
right.
And your point, the slowing your breathing down. And I didn't realize that until I didn't know that when I played, and I wish I'd had when I played because you'd be so much more under control. There's so many times during the game, your heart rate's racing and you don't think as clearly as when you slow yourself down. And I practiced that again, going on Survivor. I had a fantastic trainer, this Robbie Sherwood, and he would have me do a poem, like memorize a poem. So I could recite it verbatim. Can't talk very good right now, but I could recite it. And then he'd have me do something to elevate my heart rate, ride a bike, he'd aggravate me, whatever. And then he'd have me recite the poem again. And I couldn't recite the poem the same way I could before.
Wow.
Just to recognize that was happening to my mind and to my body was the big thing. And then it was like you're saying, then we worked on slowing down my breathing. And then all of a sudden I could remember the poem again. So it was amazing to see that happen. And that's a big thing, right? I think we touched on this before. The education about how your body and your brain works, right? And how you can really affect it with the things you put in. So if you want a healthy body, obviously you put good foods in your body and you exercise. And the same thing with your brain. If you want a healthy brain, you exercise your brain and you put healthy thoughts into your brain, right? So it's pretty cool stuff. It took me 65 years to figure it out, but I finally figured it out.
Well, it's funny because I grew up as a gymnast, and my coaches, as part of like before a meet, we would have to sit and visualize you doing your routine perfectly. Sit and visualize your perfect beam routine. And that was a really big part of it. Also, like, if you don't think you're going to fall, you're not going to fall off the beam, so pretend you're going to stay on it. And I had talked to you also at the wedding about this app that I have. It's called the Gratitude app.
Yes.
And so I get a prompt every morning and every night. And it's like a journal prompt to think about, like, and it's all based on things like gratitude. Like, what was one small thing today that happened that you felt grateful for? I mean, that's really vague, but like trying to think of what some of the good ones were, but like, name a piece of technology that helps your life for the better. What was the last time you laughed so hard your stomach hurt, and write it here. Name a mentor who helped you in some way and how they helped you, or write a thank you card to somebody who helped you this week or something. Just like really nice, positive things, so you can focus on, like a gratitude journal, the positive things. Because if you spend all day thinking about the negative things, or if you spend your evening before bed just scrolling social media and comparing yourselves to others, it just puts your mind in a more negative state. Whereas like you can control your thoughts. I say that to my 4-year-old all the time. Sometimes he wakes up like, meh, meh. I'm like, Mason, this is your day, make your choice right now. Do you want it to be a good day or do you want it to be a bad day? Because I'm ready to have a good day. Let's have a good day.
That's cool.
It's funny that you start, your morning wake ups like that, grasshoppers, let's have a good day. Because I'll say to my boys, who's ready to have a good day? And they say, me. And they stick their hands up. It's really good. I try to start that day like that.
Isn't it funny how it affects you too? Like, you're trying to do it for them, but it helps you. Really, that's the thing for me. I'm fired up at 3:30. My feet pop off and down on the ground. I'm ready to go.
Absolutely.
It's funny. Okay. So last question for you.
Okay.
One of the things we see a lot when you're coaching youth sports, parents love their kids, but there's a lot of parents, we call them snowplow parents. They want to come in and clean out the way so there's no problems for their kids, right? And the kids now, and it's great, they love their kids to death. They think they're doing the right thing, but that young boy or girl now has to fight through things, doesn't know how to get out of their comfort zone. Is that how you are, like both at work and with your own kids?
Oh, it's tough. It's so funny, Tom. I always thought, I love kids so much. I was so worried that I would spend all this time and money and education and become a mom and then just want to stay home with them all day. And shockingly, it's not that way, which is great because here I am as a pediatrician. But that balance is really hard. And I thought that I would be a parent who would think, gosh, I'm good at this. But no matter how much you know about kids, being a parent is so much harder than teaching other people how to be parents because of the emotional aspect of it. I so badly want to do a good job and I want my kids to be happy. That's what I used to always say. I just want them to be happy. I just want them to be happy. But now as they're getting a little bit older, I realize I don't just want them to be happy. I want them to learn how to deal with losing, how to deal with hearing no, how to not get their way all the time, and how to be good people and raise little gentlemen, So there's so many facets to it of being a good mom. Yes. Can I show them I love them every single day? Can I sign them up for sports and activities and play dates and do everything? Can I buy the healthy food? And sure, I could buy whatever food I want. That doesn't mean they're going to eat it. I'm learning. But, it's also making sure that I'm not a pushover, that they're not getting everything that they want, that I am teaching them right from wrong and how to sit with hard feelings and learn, no, you can't have that, or no, you need a punishment because what you did was not good. Right. So, I don't know. I'm learning. I'm teaching my patients. We're all learning.
That's right too. That's parenting, right? You're not going to be perfect. Understanding and listen, you are not going to be perfect. You'll make mistakes and you'll look back and think, geez, I should have done that differently. My youngest son, when he left high school, I went for one semester of college, and it was a total disaster. His older brother was doing great in school. So I felt bad. I said, okay, divorced father, I think, okay, well, I'll help you out a little bit. We'll get you an apartment, or you get a car and health insurance, and I'm paying for everything. And I'm thinking, okay, I'll do this for a few months. He'll get his feet on the ground and get some job and get going in a new career. So 3 years go by and I'm realizing I'm still paying for everything. I'm paying for rent, car, and I'm getting mad at him because he's not getting a job. And I think I looked in the mirror and I realized, well, I'm the problem here.
Right.
Yeah. And I finally went to him. I said, listen, I'm enabling you and this has got to stop. And he got mad at me. He wouldn't talk to me for a while. And I understood it because he didn't know any better. That's what he knew. Right. His father's going to take care. And he's fine now. But I look back and I go, like, I felt like I was, just like you're saying, I felt like I was a really good parent. But I look back at that decision. I go, what are you thinking about? That was terrible for him. But that's, he's fine now and he's off doing his stuff. Well, listen, thank you very much. I was really impressed by you when we sat down. Your ability to understand like the psychological part of your job. I mean, I just think that's so important. Obviously, the physical part is fantastic too. But like you talked before, the kids nowadays, they need that person to be there, like you said, to let them know that they are good people, but also discipline, make sure they're safe, all those different things. So you're doing a fantastic job there, Mom.
Thank you. It was such a pleasure and an honor to join you. Thanks for the invitation. We had a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll try to do this on a regular basis, like once every 2 weeks or something. And people, if they have questions, we'll try to do it on a regular basis if you're available to do it so that people know that we're going to be on. So if they have questions in advance. I think it's an important topic that they can ask you about kids and the health and the mental and physical part of it. So great to see you.
You too. Take care.